For more than 50 years, Paul Newman was married to Joanne Woodward, a love story almost unheard of in Hollywood. On being faithful to his wife, Newman famously remarked, "I have steak at home, why go out for hamburgers?"
For decades, Paul Newman and his wife were held up as one of Hollywood's rare love stories that seemed untouched by scandal, ego, or time. In an industry built on fleeting romances and carefully managed images, their marriage appeared steady, dignified, and almost untouchable. To the public, it was a story of loyalty and mutual respect, a partnership that survived fame, temptation, and the relentless spotlight. But at the age of 95, Paul Newman's wife finally chose to break her silence. And what she revealed added depth to a story many believe they already knew. Her words were not driven by regret or resentment, but by reflection. Time had given her clarity, and age had removed the need to protect illusions. Behind the smiles on red carpets and the quiet confidence seen in interviews were moments of strain, sacrifice, and emotional restraint that rarely reached the public eye. Loving a man adored by the world came with challenges few could fully understand. And for years, she carried those truths privately. This was not an attempt to tarnish a legacy. It was an effort to humanize it. By speaking now, she offered a final, honest perspective on a marriage shaped by fame, devotion, and difficult choices. What emerged was not a scandal, but a deeper truth, one that reveals how even the strongest love stories are built not on perfection, but on endurance, forgiveness, and silence carefully chosen. For much of Hollywood history, Paul Newman's marriage was spoken of with rare reverence. While other celebrity relationships unraveled under pressure, his union appeared steady, private, and grounded in mutual respect. To the outside world, it seemed almost immune to the chaos of fame. But behind that carefully maintained privacy was a woman who chose silence for decades, believing that love sometimes meant protecting truths rather than sharing them. At 95, with time having softened the need for restraint, she finally began to reflect openly on what that life truly required of her. Being married to Paul Newman meant sharing a life with a man admired not only for his talent, but for his charm, integrity, and magnetic presence. Everywhere he went, attention followed. Admiration was constant. Opportunities were endless. His wife understood early on that fame was not just his burden to carry, but hers as well. While he faced the pressures of stardom publicly, she faced them quietly, navigating a world where privacy was fragile and assumptions were relentless. She revealed that the early years demanded adjustment. Success came quickly, and with it, long absences, demanding schedules, and a growing distance created not by lack of love, but by circumstance. She learned how to manage a household that often felt incomplete, how to remain emotionally steady while the world claimed so much of her husband's time and energy. These were sacrifices she accepted willingly, yet they were not without cost. What the public rarely saw was the discipline required to maintain normalcy. Their marriage survived not because it was effortless, but because it was intentional. There were moments of doubt, exhaustion, and quiet frustration, feelings she chose not to share even with those closest to her. She believed that protecting the marriage meant shielding it from public interpretation, especially in an industry that thrived on speculation. As the years passed, their bond deepened through shared understanding rather than idealized romance. Love matured into something less visible but more enduring. She described it as a partnership built on trust, compromise, and an unspoken agreement to face challenges privately. Paul Newman, she explained, was deeply committed to his family, but like any man navigating fame, he was not untouched by its pressures. Acknowledging that reality did not weaken her love. It grounded it. Her silence was often mistaken for simplicity, as if a long marriage to a beloved star required no effort. In truth, it demanded resilience. She learned to live alongside public admiration without letting it define her worth. She learned when to speak and when to remain quiet, when to support and when to step back. These choices, she now admits, shaped not only their marriage, but her own identity. Looking back, she does not describe her life as one of sacrifice alone, but of conscious decisions. She chose loyalty over exposure, dignity over disclosure. At 95, breaking that silence is not about revealing secrets, but about honoring truth. The truth that lasting love is rarely simple, often private. and always shaped by the strength to endure what the world never sees. As Paul Newman's career reached its peak, the distance between public image and private life grew wider. Fame amplified everything: admiration, expectations, and temptation. And his wife became increasingly aware that loving a man so visible to the world required a different kind of strength. She explained that there were moments when the attention surrounding him felt overwhelming, not because of jealousy but because of the constant awareness that their marriage existed under a magnifying glass. Every interaction, every absence, every success invited speculation. She could neither control nor escape. She spoke candidly about the emotional discipline it took to remain grounded. Trust was not something assumed. It was something practiced daily. Long filming schedules and extended travel meant time apart, and with that came loneliness that few people acknowledged. She learned how to be self-reliant without becoming distant, how to support his ambitions without losing her own sense of self. These were quiet negotiations made far from cameras, in moments where love had to be reaffirmed without applause. What surprised many was her honesty about imperfection. She did not describe their marriage as flawless or immune to strain. There were disagreements, moments of hurt, and periods when silence filled the space where words felt too heavy. But she emphasized that conflict was never the enemy, avoidance was. When challenges arose, they faced them privately, determined not to let outside voices define their reality. That decision, she believes, preserved their bond more than any romantic ideal ever could. She also reflected on Paul Newman's internal struggles. Despite his success, he carried pressures that weighed heavily on him. Responsibility, expectation, and the constant need to perform left little room for vulnerability. At home, away from the public gaze, he sought normalcy and understanding. She became the one place where he could step out of the role the world demanded and simply be himself. That responsibility, while meaningful, was not always easy to bear. Her silence during those years was intentional. She understood how easily personal truth could be distorted once exposed. Rather than correct rumors or defend appearances, she chose to protect what mattered most. To her, love was not proven through explanation, but through consistency. Staying, listening, and enduring were acts far more powerful than public declarations. As time passed, the intensity of fame slowly softened, replaced by reflection. Their marriage evolved into something steadier, shaped less by ambition and more by companionship. She described those later years as quieter but richer, filled with shared routines and mutual understanding. The storms of earlier decades had left marks, but they had also forged a bond rooted in realism rather than illusion. Now, speaking in '95, she acknowledges that silence carried both strength and weight. It preserved dignity, but it also required restraint few would choose willingly. Breaking that silence now is not about revisiting pain, but about honoring the full truth of a life lived alongside greatness. It is a reminder that enduring love is not defined by perfection, but by perseverance, by choosing each other again and again, even when the world is watching. With time, reflection brought a deeper understanding of what their marriage had truly been. At 95, Paul Newman's wife spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity shaped by decades of lived experience. She explained that the hardest part was never the public attention itself, but the quiet expectations placed on her to remain composed, supportive, and invisible while standing beside a man the world adored. Strength, she realized, was often mistaken for silence, and grace was expected rather than acknowledged. She recalled how easily the public simplified her role. To many, she was seen only as the steady presence beside a legendary figure, rarely as a woman with her own emotional landscape. Yet, behind closed doors, she navigated the same doubts, insecurities, and moments of fatigue as anyone else, only without the freedom to express them openly. She learned to compartmentalize, to preserve harmony by choosing patience when confrontation felt risky, and to absorb pressure without letting it harden her heart. As the years passed, the pace of life slowed. Fame loosened its grip, and the demands that once dictated their routines softened. In those quieter years, she saw Paul Newman not as a public figure, but as a man confronting aging, reflection, and the weight of a life fully lived. Their conversations became deeper, less guarded. Regrets were acknowledged without blame, and gratitude surfaced more often than frustration. Love, she said, no longer needed to prove itself. It simply existed. She spoke of forgiveness, not as a dramatic act, but as a gradual understanding that no life, no marriage unfolds without missteps. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting, nor did it mean denying pain. It meant choosing peace over resentment and honesty over illusion. That choice, she believes, sustained them more than passion ever could. It allowed room for growth, acceptance, and relation to her husband's legacy. Only later did she fully appreciate her own resilience, the quiet strength required to remain grounded while living in the orbit of fame. Speaking now, she wanted that strength to be recognized, not for praise but for truth. She wanted people to understand that enduring love often asks for unseen labor and unspoken courage. She acknowledged that silence protected their marriage, but it also came at a cost. There were moments she wished she had spoken sooner, shared more honestly, or allowed herself to be seen beyond the role she felt obligated to fulfill. Yet she does not dwell on regret. Instead, she views her silence as a product of its time, a choice shaped by values of privacy, loyalty, and restraint that defined her generation. Breaking that silence now feels less like confession and more like closure. At this stage of life, she feels no need to preserve myths or defend perceptions. What matters is truth. Not sensational truth, but human truth. The truth that love can be strong and complicated at the same time. The truth that devotion often requires endurance. And the truth that even the most admired partnerships are built on ordinary struggles faced with extraordinary commitment. In sharing her perspective, she hopes to offer something meaningful rather than revelatory. Her story is not about exposing flaws but about honoring reality. It is about reminding the world that behind every celebrated figure is a shared life shaped by compromise, patience, and mutual resilience. For her, speaking now is an act of dignity, a final acknowledgement that love's greatest strength lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to remain present through all that is imperfect. At 95, Paul Newman's wife speaks with the calm certainty that only time can give. There is no urgency left to persuade, no need to protect an image already sealed by history. What remains is perspective. Looking back, she understands that their marriage was never meant to be an example of perfection, but of endurance. It survived not because it was untouched by difficulty, but because both partners chose commitment over impulse and privacy over performance. She explains that living alongside a legend required learning when to step forward and when to step aside. The world wanted stories, explanations, and reassurance, but she chose restraint. That choice, she believes, allowed their relationship to belong to them rather than to public expectation. Love, in her view, was not something to be constantly explained or defended. It was something to be lived quietly, strengthened by routine, trust, and mutual respect. In later years, as public attention faded and life slowed, the rewards of that restraint became clear. Their days were no longer shaped by schedules or demands, but by shared habits and unspoken understanding. Conversations became simpler, yet deeper. There was space for reflection, for acknowledging mistakes without reopening wounds, and for appreciating the life they had built together. Fame no longer stood between them. It became a chapter already written. She speaks tenderly of companionship, the kind that does not rely on romance or admiration, but on presence. Aging together brought its own challenges, yet it also stripped away illusions. What remained was honesty. They no longer needed to impress each other or the world. Love existed in small gestures, patience, and familiarity that only decades can create. Breaking her silence now is not about rewriting Paul Newman's legacy. It is about completing it. She wants people to understand that greatness is rarely solitary. It is sustained by those who offer stability when the world becomes overwhelming. Her role, often unseen, was essential, not extraordinary in appearance, but profound in impact. She carried the weight of privacy so that their life together could remain intact. Her message is measured and deliberate. Love is not weakened by truth. It is strengthened by it. By speaking now, she does not diminish what they shared. She honors it fully. She acknowledges the sacrifices, the patience, and the emotional labor that lasting partnership requires. These are not flaws in a love story, but its foundation. As her words settle, one thing becomes clear: the truth that comes out is not scandal, but humanity. A reminder that even the most admired marriages are built quietly, sustained through choices made far from applause. At 95, her voice carries not revelation, but wisdom, a final testament to a life lived with loyalty, restraint, and enduring love.